much, Siobhan, for the welcome and for the introduction. Just to confirm, you can hear me okay, please?
Yeah, we can.
Great, super. So I will share my screen and go from here. Just to let participants know as well, a few of the participants have put the link for the booklet in the chat as well, so you'll be able to access it from the Run EU website there, or from the THEA website either. So thanks again, Siobhan, for the introduction. And my talk today is on co-design of a sustainable tourism research strategy for Run EU. And in this, we're looking at regional social impact and innovation. And as Siobhan said there, just to welcome all the partners from across Run, our new partners, of course, from Belgium and from Spain, and all of the industry and other academic colleagues that have joined us today as well. You're very welcome. So the structure of what I will talk about today is I'm going to begin by outlining some of the current challenges in tourism industry and how this intersects with policy and environment, and of course intersects with academia as well. I'm going to give some examples of what sort of collaboration we're doing already in the Run EU network, and looking at how we're going to build on this in the Run EU Plus work, particularly in terms of what opportunities are on the horizon in the next 18 months or so. And I'll give some examples of what I think has been some good practice in working together to date, where successes have been, but also some limitations and where we need to build on our collaboration to date as well. So I suppose, first of all, just to set the scene, tourism is very much an industry that's configured by four main theoretical pillars over the last couple of years. And this is a nice framework to give it some structure: volatility, exposure, resilience, and adaptation. And these keywords, I suppose, when we think of some of the challenges that have happened in tourism in the last couple of years, we can clearly see the volatility of tourism with closures that have happened during the pandemic, for example, where we've learned very much that it's relatively easy to close down an industry quite quickly, but it's extremely difficult to reopen it. So what we saw during the years 2020 and 2021 was an almost total collapse of international tourism across Europe by comparison to pre-pandemic levels. And while it's reopened quite strongly in 2022, it has yet to hit the pre-pandemic figures. So there's a very interesting theme around volatility happening in tourism at the moment. Secondly, to consider that tourism is an industry that's really configured by its exposure to external forces. It's very exposed to the environment, to the economy, to health, to pandemics, to terrorism, to all sorts of shocks, be they good, bad, or indifferent. And this means that it's an industry that needs quite a lot of protection, particularly from policymakers and from state intervention and from good research in academia as well. Thirdly, tourism is a very resilient industry. While it does often suffer shocks, it has this very impressive ability to rebound. And historically, after shocks, tourism has usually rebounded eventually to a stronger position than it was in prior to the shock happening. And we've seen this happen over and over the last 7 or 8 decades, all the way back to World War II. And finally, adaptation, which is a critical word in tourism studies over the last couple of years, which is about adapting to the new normal. And that tourism has changed. It's changed from the pandemic. It's changing at the moment quite rapidly from climate change and from other shocks happening in Europe, such as the refugee crisis. And as a result, there's a new normal for tourism, and research is needed to inform this as well. So some of the current challenges in tourism, and for, I suppose, anybody that engages with current affairs, you'll be well aware of these, but just to give a bit of structure to what we're looking at. First of all, climate change, which is both a key driver of change. Tourism is a key driver of this change, but it's also suffering from the impact. And we see this repeatedly in coastal communities, for example, which are suffering from rising sea levels. We have a biodiversity challenge all across Europe, affects many of the countries where our partner Run EU members are located. And again, tourism is both a driver of this change and suffering from the impacts of it. We have huge production and consumption issues. Tourism is a very, very resource intensive industry. And I could see some of my colleagues from the hospitality industry logging on to the meeting earlier on. and they will know about the huge costs that are involved with the production and consumption of tourism activities, whether it's in heating hot water for swimming pools, whether it's in the massive amounts of food waste, resource shopping and so on. It's a very resource intensive industry. We also have in some of our European partners significant impact on residents through over-tourism, particularly with the social impacts of this, where many European cities and regions are suffering from increased costs and very strong difficulties in accessing housing, impacts of sharing economy and companies like Airbnb. We have human rights issues, which I think anyone who's watching the World Cup at the moment will have been very familiar with the discourse around this, both in terms of labour rights and fair pay, and the impact of utilising migrant labour for mega events such as the World Cup in Qatar at the moment. We have the post-COVID-19 recovery challenge. The European industry in particular has learned that it's fairly easy to close an airport and to close borders and to close resorts and hotels, but it's much harder to reopen, particularly when you've got a mobile staff that don't tend to stay in the industry very long. It's extremely difficult and costly to reopen. We have the war in Ukraine and how the security landscape in Europe has changed, and we have security hesitation from international visitors to Europe has been recorded this year, for example, particularly from American tourists who were hesitant about visiting Europe during a war period. We have mobility issues associated with this as well, of course, with changing access routes and so on, and limited flight paths across Europe. There are significant issues in the tourism industry at the moment around labour and cost availability. We'll have many of our partners here from RunEU will be reporting a decreased number in students studying on tourism related courses, but this is going very much in a negative correlation against the demand for the workforce happening at the moment. We have a refugee crisis in Europe where we have nearly 8 million Ukrainians have been dispersed in Europe over the last 8 months, with many also from Syria and North Africa dispersed over longer periods of time as well. And this has had multiple different types of impacts on the tourism industry over the last year. For example, in Ireland, a significant percentage of Ireland's hospitality and hotel bedrooms are currently occupied by refugees. I think the current number is running at around 30% of available rooms. So it's a very significant impact in Ireland. So what are we doing about all these challenges in RunEU and in RunEU Plus? You know, there's a lot of issues that I just put on the table there, but we have a big network, and you know I think we have an ethical and we have an ethical obligation to be addressing some of these social and policy related issues. So what we're doing to tackle some of these is we're collaborating first of all on co-supervision of PhD theses, and we have quite a number of students who've started, particularly between TUS and LIREA, who are addressing some of these issues, particularly those kind of issues around environmental sustainability. And that's been a learning curve for us. We've, I suppose, had to commence these during the pandemic. We've had to get quite familiar quite quickly with intercultural relationships. We've had to get quite familiar quickly with technology. And we've had to, I suppose, be very quick to learn about student abilities and student expectations as well. So it's been an interesting journey so far in that space. There's also been development of a joint master's degree, which encompasses many of these United Nations Sustainable Development Goal type issues. There's been many researcher and PhD student mobility visits happening over the last number of months as well. Again, particularly to LIREA. We need to enhance and increase the number of these across the network. We have a development of an SAP looking at ethics and values in tourism. And our first one of these is very much focused on some of these sorts of issues that I raised. And it's currently in development and will be promoted very soon on the RunEU portal. It's looking at ethics and values in tourism and hospitality with a particular focus for 2023 on human trafficking, and that will be delivered in Athlone next year. We also have a number of applications in development for Erasmus Key Action 2 projects, which are in spring next year, and also for Alliance for Innovation projects. And we recently held a discovery mission, which I'm going to brief you about, to connect who we are in Run EU with some of these identified challenges. So to get I suppose, some momentum behind our project, what we kicked off quite recently was a mobility visit to Athlone, where we brought some researchers from Athlone and Limerick, together with some colleagues from Hungary, from the Netherlands, and from Portugal. And we put these colleagues together with our PhD students, brought in some industry representatives and some external experts, and spent 2 days working together on developing a framework for some project applications in spring. So the structure of this, these 2 days were that we opened up with a presentation from a man called Professor Terry Stevens. He's a visiting professor in our university. And the purpose of this was to take some of these big macro issues and to inspire and encourage us, and I suppose to put us on a path to doing something that's innovative and disruptive. As many of you know in your own academic disciplines, there's a lot of I suppose very safe academic research conducted, and that's good and worthy of doing. But sometimes we need that push to be a little bit more innovative and to disrupt, shake things up a bit. So we had a very inspiring opening talk from Professor Stevens. We then moved to look at some current Erasmus Key Action 2 partnerships to, I suppose, get everybody familiar with the structure of how these work, how they're funded and what kind of projects can be done and what sort of outputs emerge from them. And then we closed off our first day with presentation of a current sample industry challenge, which was from an organization in Ireland called the Irish Boat Rental Association, who gave us a very interesting briefing on their need, their legislative need to decarbonize by 50% by the year 2030. And they talked about some of the consumer behavior, technological and engineering and energy related challenges that they have, and also some of the marketing challenges that they have in this space as well. So the outcomes of this, of course, like every good academic meeting, you end up with a number of whiteboards and lots of post-it notes and lots of emails circulating over and back afterwards. But we resolved to apply for 4 Erasmus Key Action 2 projects in spring 2023. Not all partners will be on all of these bids, I would imagine, by the time that they are finalized. But we will have, I think every partner will be on at least a couple that they're interested in. And this will give us an opportunity to conduct some work on all sorts of topics that we've raised here in this talk today, including environmental sustainability, biodiversity, circular economy, tourism and heritage came up as well, and also tourism and some of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. We also, from this meeting, talked about developing some other projects, including further PhD supervision and joint publications and so on, and work on those is progressing as well. The key pillars of the Erasmus Plus applications that we'll be looking at are that they have to map against at least one of the 4 pillars listed here. And probably no great surprises what these pillars are. They're very much embedded in all European policy around inclusion and diversity, environmental sustainability, a digital dimension and the associated transformation in this space, and finally participation and civic engagement. The funding value for these projects range from 120 to 250 to 400,000 euro. The applicants choose from one of the 3 predefined amounts, and they're really an ideal first step into the EU funding world, which is a very useful vehicle for us as tourism academics. I suppose because we had many people come in the partnership who are experienced researchers, but we also had many who are taking those first steps into the research space, and it's an ideal kind of first step in that direction. So what's worked so far? I think one of the most important things that we've done is have that face-to-face meeting. I think it's really critical in the Run EU network to meet the people that you want to work with. It helps to build momentum. I think once you've met people and had lunch with them and so on, you're much more likely to pick up the phone to them or to drop them an email and get a quick reply. So that's been really helpful. And then also, I suppose, not just closing off the meeting at the end to ensure that you've follow-up meetings online and Zoom afterwards. And that's something that we need to improve on ourselves in our own group, but it's something we're very aware of. So our next steps in our work at the moment, I suppose, is to begin to connect what we're doing in Run EU tourism research as best we can to the different industry, policy and federations, and to try and bridge this sort of gap that exists between academia and industry. Particularly in tourism, the tourism industry has not traditionally been one, in Ireland at least, that would look towards scientific research for problem solving. It's a very commercial operation, very commercially driven, of course, but it doesn't tend to have had the same evaluation of academic research that STEM organizations may have had, for example. So we do need to do a little piece of work there about promoting the value of research to the tourism industry. So our outcome and our next steps is that we're working on our applications. These are all due to be submitted in spring 2023. We'll have a busy few months after Christmas working on these in January and February. And we want to then, I suppose, alongside these is continue some of the really good bilateral relationships that exist within the network as well. So these have been very effective in bringing some of the research to light. So that's all from me. I just have my email address here at the bottom as well, anthony.johnston@toos.ie. If we have any tourism researchers or people from tourism or hospitality academia who are interested in partnering with us, joining in with us on project applications, maybe working with us on developing our next steps around PhD partnerships and so on, please just drop me an email and I'll come and visit you, or I'll drop you an email back and we'll arrange a phone call or a Zoom chat and see how we can bring you into the network.